May I kick off? Well, first, my name is Konstantin Shlygov. I work in the Embassy of the Russian Federation in London, and I would like to commend the talks of both today's speakers. But I would like to really kick off the discussion and, draw your attention to the fact that it's a little bit paradoxical. The topic of today's meeting is a little bit paradoxical in itself. Orwell never was in Russia, never wrote about Russia. Well, he wrote Animal Farm about the Soviet Revolution, which was about negation of everything Russian, right? So it wasn't about Russia, it was about Soviet. And Orwell wrote 1984, which was a caution for Britain. Well, partly based on Soviet, partly based on Nazi experience, but it was a caution for Britain. However, most people in Britain see Orwell's fiction as credible sources of how to see Russia. So it's really a little bit, strange why people see this. But at the same time, I would just like to ask everyone who is gathered here to think that, every great author, and Orwell is no exception, is universal. And he can and should be applied to any situation, and definitely Orwell should be applied to Britain and to modern Britain. As Mr. Lloyd quoted the letter, I was really very much amused to hear that it's not appropriate to publish a book about where the characters are pigs. Well, in today's Britain, it would offend a sensible religious minority, wouldn't it? I think so. So it might not be appropriate in today's Britain to publish a book about pigs. You don't have telescreens, but you do have a similar complex word Facebook. Absolutely everything in 1984, except for the explicit nature of violence, can be applied to today's Britain. It can be applied to any other country as well. It can be applied to Russia, it can be applied to the United States, to any modern society.
Even the Big Brother.
Well, it's collective Big Brother.
It's written as totalitarian as described in 1984?
The best dictatorship is anonymous dictatorship, as the Russian writer Pelevin put it. Well, I'm just quoting Pelevin. Thank you. Just the discussion.
Just to react immediately to your view, Konstantin, I think that, Masha said it, I think you have to discriminate. And as between Britain today and the vision that Orwell had of in 1984 and in Animal Farm. What he was writing about was, as you will readily gather, since you were a Russian yourself, was of a wholly totalitarian dictatorship. One which, to be sure, under Stalin, became extraordinarily powerful. There's no question that Stalin built up from what was still, when he took over, relatively chaotic, into an almost co-equal superpower. But the way in which he did it, I think most people now in Russia themselves would regard as being as sacrificing, 20 million lives? Something of that kind. Especially in the famines in Ukraine and elsewhere. So one has to admit to what Stalin did in terms of making it into a bulwark, which in the end did defeat Nazism. It did do that, and with huge sacrifice. At the same time, what he did, and what he regarded as being legitimate, was to turn against his own citizens, millions of them, Russians, Ukrainians, Balts, Central Asians, Caucasians, and shovel them into the camps in which they very often perished. The second thing about the pigs, I think it's right to bring that up, because I guess if there's any kind of cognate to the intellectuals' dislike in the 1940s or 1930s when he was writing of the Soviet Union being criticized. The cognate now, I think, is in Islam and Islamism. And I think to some extent, some of the debate within the UK, within the West in general, about how appropriate, terrible word sometimes, it is to argue strongly against Islamism or Islamic terrorism. I think that does show, the debates around that do show something of the same distaste for being nasty to people. There was something of that actually when the Irish Republican terrorism happened, and that there was a distaste for criticising, because after all you couldn't criticise one without criticising the Irish. And I think that's wrong. I think there has to be strong criticism, which can of course be refuted. And I see in the figure of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who has written a couple of books now, and of course now lives under police protection, that the debates around her by Western intellectuals who very often disapprove of her because she is not just against Islamism, but Islam. And it seems to me that to condemn her for these views, one can argue about her views, but to condemn her for actually saying them and saying that they shouldn't have been written is the same kind of reaction as we saw, as Orwell was saying. So insofar as you're hinting, you didn't actually say it, after all you're a diplomat, but if you're saying or hinting that one shouldn't say that, I would disagree with you. I think one should say that, and that the argument should be robust. Others can say something else, but to say this is not proper, shouldn't be published, shouldn't be said, the woman shouldn't be on television, as some people have argued, I think is wrong.